Well, the 1990s experienced a great deal of industry frustration. The enormous time lag between business requirements, the applications and features customers were requesting, and the ability of technology that answered those needs led to the cancelling of many projects. Business models, technology, and customer requisites changed during this lag time. And the pace of change and uncertainty only compounded before the realization for industry to be agile dawned. The value of agility in today's workforce cannot be overstated. Businesses are adapting faster than ever as they move towards more flexible organizational structures. This shift means that there's less adherence to stricter roles and hierarchies. Gone are the days when only senior leaders had to manage strategy and business managers had to manage finances. Today, great ideas can come from any level of the organization. So there's more focus on what employees bring to the table as opposed to their standing in the organization chart. Well, there are many things that can inhibit an organization's ability to be agile. Bureaucracy that slows down processes, internal politics that prolong decision-making, silos that obfuscate the root causes of problems and the ownership of solutions, and a lack of trust that makes communication difficult, to name just a few. When these barriers to agility exist, the fix isn't simple, but it isn't insurmountable as well. Today, organizations in every industry need to gather and act on information, make decisions quickly, and implement change to meet rapidly evolving markets. Many people call the ability to do so quickly agility. The foundations for agility are at the heart of Dale Carnegie's approach to relationships and the interpersonal skills he began teaching decades ago. Agility involves seeking out new information and embracing continuous change in a collaborative way, without resistance, bias, and resentment. And to discuss this very fascinating topic on agility this evening, we have an eclectic panel. Let's hear what the experts have to say. Please allow me to introduce our panelists for this evening. Our first panelist has an eminent career spanning almost 25 years, over which she has played an instrumental role in shaping talent, leadership, learning and development, diversity and inclusion across industries like technology, manufacturing, and FMCG. From Hindustan Coca-Cola to Cisco and Intel, she has played a pivotal part in the success of people in these distinguished organizations, driving them to be coveted employers and flourishing organizations. Needless to say, her achievements have been extremely noteworthy, and she is a respected thought leader in the people development space. Please put your hands together for Seema Nair, Senior EVP and Head People Development Group at Reliance Industries Limited. Yes, please. Welcome, Seema. An illustrious career and an extremely respected voice in the HR space, our second panelist has been with Forbes Marshall Group for the last 28 years. He has steered the company towards outstanding people-driven achievements that have won him several awards for best HR practices. Under his leadership, Forbes Marshall was recognized as a great place to work for and also won the strong commitment to HR excellence at CII. An accomplished speaker and a coach himself, we are honored to welcome Bobby Kuriakose, Director HR and Learning Development, Forbes Marshall Group. Welcome, Bobby. Our next panelist has flown all the way from Egypt to be with us. She is a seasoned professional with a proven track record in establishing new businesses and driving business growth in multinational organizations across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. She's a Dale Carnegie Master Trainer and holds the position of Vice President, EMEA and APAC. She has held a variety of executive regional positions, managing portfolios of brands in leading Fortune 500 companies, such as Kraft Foods, Hero, and Philips, where she successfully expanded the business to new territories and developed significant alliances. We are excited to extend a warm welcome to Noha El Daly from Dale Carnegie and Associates. Welcome, Noha. And representing India and representing Dale Carnegie India, our very own Pallavi Jha. Finally, introducing our moderator for the panel discussion, our Executive Director of Dale Carnegie India, a born multitasker who juggles the role of author, motivational speaker, executive coach, and mentor. He's a TEDx speaker and has addressed audiences at Dell, Columbia Business School, Goldman Sachs, University of California, amongst many others. His knack of enthralling audiences has taken him from Mexico to Los Angeles. He founded the popular sports channel cricketnext.com and has held senior positions at ITC Threadneedle Asset Management London, Alliance Capital New York, Bank of America, and ANZ Grindlays Bank. He's advised top management, CEOs, as well as senior political leaders in India. You might know him as the national spokesperson of the Indian National Congress or one of the top influencers on Twitter. But Sanjay has also written a bestseller on leadership called The Superstar Syndrome, co-authored with Dr. Myra White, a professor at Harvard Medical School. Let's give it up for Sanjay Jha. And that's over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you very much. First, let's test the mic. Can you guys hear me at the back? Let's test all the panelists. If you can say something.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
Is it loud and clear? No.
Yeah,
Good evening.
and good evening to all.
So, are we audible at the back? Yes. All right. Thanks very much for a very generous introduction. I want to let you know that today's topic is agility. You know, this is a very dynamic subject, and we've got a lovely panel here, both on my left and right, and I will try and keep this very fast paced. So, I request my panelists here to actually keep their answers concise and brief, so that each one can rebut the other. Although I'll make sure that this doesn't become as fascinating as the TV debates you watch in the night, and or maybe I will try to do that actually, and also to get you in at some point when the time is nearing its exhaustion limit. Are you all excited to be here this evening? I want to let you know, Mumbai, this is fantastic that all of us were here at sharp 7 and we could start on time. Weren't you stunned by that? You actually told me that, right?
Well, I actually thought that it was amazing that it should be, it's a lesson for other markets. I mean, that we are all here on time, so which is great.
And you know something, a couple of years ago, they used to joke about India's punctuality as, Indian stretchable time, that we were very flexi. So if you said 7, you walked in at 8, people thought you were very important,
late,
but now it's very different. Well, I want to start today's conversation by actually telling you that I saw a movie over the weekend. Maybe some of you did, and I want to ask you whether you did. It's called Ford versus Ferrari. How many of you saw the film? How many of you have heard of it? Yeah? And if you've probably heard of it or you've seen it, you know it already. For the rest, it's by a sheer coincidence. It times with the subject of the evening. I can promise you we had nothing to do with the producers who launched it here. But that movie is about the classical Ford taking on the mantle of being a sleek, sexy sports car. And this happened around the time of the mid-1960s, when we all know the baby boomers were happening. And I think when you look at me, you know that I represent that generation. And therefore, I don't like you millennials in the crowd. And I can tell you this for a fact, that the baby boomers were then what you are today. Restless, irreverent, rebellious, I care a damn, I will leave a job wherever I find a better tasting cappuccino, and if the boss doesn't give me a proper appraisal, I'm hopping across to the competitor. That's what the baby boomers were then. And this film actually captures the essence of what we're going to talk this evening. In fact, interestingly, as I say that Ford actually launched a sports vehicle to look more trendy and happening to the generation that wanted to buy a car, which is not boring, staid, and conservative that Ford was doing. And in a great number of ways, that's agility best defined. So if you haven't seen the film, you might probably want to take a look, because it's based on a true story. It's a biopic. And from what I have been reading in the New York Times, could be in the running for the Oscar. How many of you here actually, once upon a time, in India, had a BlackBerry phone? Hands up.
Yeah, I think.
I did. And I can tell you, I remember the time when the BlackBerry was the big hot thing happening in our country. It was a status symbol to have. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, and you remember the time when we first experienced the BBM? That BBM days that you could actually message each other without paying for it. And it had a more, kind of security feature in whatever. Now we know that even WhatsApp as well. I don't know who's reading your WhatsApp message. But the fact of the matter is that the BBM revolutionized the whole concept of messaging on mobile phones. Where is BlackBerry today? And end of day, I think when you talk of agility, these are the things that we got to keep in mind. The BlackBerry doesn't exist anymore in the space of retail sale. It still has an enterprise business. But the fact of the matter is that, there's a message here for all the companies we represent, that if you're not on the ball, frankly, you're off the curve. And I think today's discussion, therefore, for the panelists is to share with you what their experiences are and what we as a team can learn on agility. So are we ready for the conversations, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah? Okay, let's get rolling. First, I want a quick definition from each one of you. Everyone knows agility is speed and stuff. How do you define organizational agility? Let's start with you, Pallavi, and then go down the road. Just a quick definition.
Yeah, so I think agility is really about creating, if you really talk about the culture of agility in an organization, it's about creating the dynamics that allow for quick decision making and action.
All right, okay. Yeah. Keep this short, 30 seconds everyone along. Yeah, Seema?
For me, largely, what comes to mind is doing what it takes, right? Doing what it takes to build a successful, sustainable business, right? Your business objectives could be many, but basically just doing what it takes, right? And sometimes even proving your own decisions wrong and saying, okay, if that was the wrong path, then how do I correct myself and keep going, right?
Right. So maybe even course correction is part of agility. Yeah.
For me, it's more of the ecosystems, having the environment that would allow for a sustainable agility, that it's not on the spur of the moment, it's not creativity, it's a sustainable process of agility.
So that's an interesting definition. So you're saying that agility does not mean that you're just sitting there and in a laboratory and coming out with crazy wild ideas, right? Okay, fine.
Bobby, agility is all about creating vibrant employee experiences which are continuous in nature and moving away from the standard HR cycles, wherein an adult learns 80% of the learning comes through experience, and if you provide the right kind of employee experiences, it leads to natural agility and learning as far as the person is concerned.
Okay, Bobby, will come to you on that because you're talking about very innovative and inventive employee experiences. We'd love to ask you at some point, what have you done in your organization? Seema, let me start with you first, actually. The popular concept, okay, and I could be wrong, but when people look at, say, an Amazon or a Google or, for example, Spotify, these are the very hot and happening apps. They look at agility to be more of a techie kind of a concept. That companies that you represent, and of course there are certain divisions I'll come to later, but you represent a large, huge conglomerate. Essentially, people think it's more of a tech sector game. I'm sure you don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that. Have you ever heard of the concept of elephants walking a tightrope? right? And in my mind, when I think about Reliance, right, and I specifically come from the part of Reliance which is, the behemoth, right, which is the manufacturing organization. I represent the hydrocarbons vertical and the allied business verticals, right, which are, many of them are relatively new age. But even within hydrocarbons, right, there's a lot that's happening in our sector. So as an example, if you think about energy, right, today, I mean, energy and environment, right, and sustainability, right? I mean, these are almost bywords for each other. There's a lot that organizations in this ecosystem, right, are doing to say, and probably it's still led in some cases by what is good and what is right. But in many cases, it's the pressure of the future consumers, the future business models, right? And so, for example, I also came to Reliance from Coke, right? And Coke once again, right? I mean, the same conversation. In fact, I still remember this was part of my hiring interview conversation, right? Was as a mom and as a consumer, right? I mean, ideally, I want to avoid your product, right? Because I'm telling my daughters constantly, try and drink less of your product, right? And so, do you want to push your product? Do you want to push your business? Right, and what does sustainable business look like for you from that perspective? And I remember the CEO, right? This was a gentleman called TKK, and he's still with Coke, by the way. And he literally had this twinkle in his eye, and he said, "Let me tell you what all we're doing," right? And so then this whole low sugar, no sugar, perfect fruit revolution, right? Once again, then plastics and circular plastics and so on and so forth, right? I mean, so he obviously took the next 30 minutes just to tell me what all they were doing, right, in that space. And obviously, it's come to bear even more fruit in the last, several years, right, in terms of, by the way, I don't know whether you know, but Coke is also the biggest buyer of mango, right, as a product, mango pulp in the entire country, right? So that's not a data point that a lot of people necessarily would know, right? It's the number one buyer of mango pulp, right, in the country. But coming back, right, I think, so some of it may be, wanting to do what is right, but some of it may be simply having a business model, right, that's sustainable in the long run. And well, all of you probably have heard about the move even within Reliance Hydrocarbons, right, to get to oil to cash or the setup of the O2C organization. That's obviously a very big topic for us right now. And it's all about moving from energy being used as raw energy to, how do you convert that into longer term, right? I mean, end chain. So for example, when you're talking about petrochemicals, right, and all the different applications that come in over there, how do you sustain your business, right, past? And chances are within the next decade or so, we're going to move from, fuel guzzlers, right, to potentially much more electric, potentially much more other sustainable forms of energy. And,
so
how do you become
basically
a
what you're
long-term
saying
player in
is,
that?
no, basically what you're saying is that you agree with the hypothesis that end of day agility is not something which can be just talked about with the tech sector as it is popularly
Every
done.
sector, it's relevant
Every
to every
company has
sector.
to do it, but we'll come to the size part of it and where Reliance has actually been a fairly disruptive player. Noah, coming to you here, because you represent Dale Carnegie not just in the Europe and Middle East, but in other parts of the world as well, and you're an experienced person from the corporate sector. Now, in the Dale Carnegie report, and I speak very dispassionately or very neutral, so I'm going to ask you this question. In the Dale Carnegie report, you talk somewhere about Netflix being a real agile player. I mean, how many of us in this room are on Netflix? How many of us are on Amazon Prime? As you can see, quite if you add up, everybody's on somewhere. How many of us are on Hotstar? So clearly, and how many of us are on all three? Me including. So as you can see, there's a massive influx in the success of streaming services. I mean, incredible as it may seem, you have a movie which was produced at $160 million, starring an Oscar winner, Robert De Niro, being launched on Netflix. I mean, it had a theatrical release of sorts in America, sort of, very limited release. You had to pay a bomb to get a ticket, but you watched it in the luxury of your home. 3.5 hours though. But a question to you, Noah, is somewhere, interestingly in that techie conversation that happens on the Dale Carnegie report, there is a mention of what Pallavi mentioned in her introduction, and I caught that when she said it, social intelligence. All right? I mean, I can get an idea what you're trying to say. Would you like to elaborate on why do you believe that this term becomes so dominant in the Dale Carnegie report on agility?
And thank you for asking this question, Sanjay, because the markets have changed. I mean, you mentioned the millennials, and whether we're millennials or we're not, the technology has taken us away from society. And so what research has been proving is that when we go to the workforce, we're less social. And when the corporations are expecting us to work in teams. They're expecting us to work cross-functionally. Yet, everybody is more and more individualistic in the way that we're talking and dealing with each other. I have my nephews who are with their friends in the same room, and they're chatting with each other through their mobile, which, when we think of it, is quite insane. But this is what our, the new trends are. So when we talk about social intelligence, it is about efficiency in the workplace. It's about bridging between how we are in our in our private life and what is required in our professional life for us to succeed. So that is really the key importance, is building those competencies and the skills that we've kind of lost in our personal life, but that are still top of mind when it comes to corporations.
Get you. I want to take that conversation forward, Bobby. There is a point of view. I mean, if you ask my daughter's generation, I mean, she's like, Dad, you never were in touch with your friends. You criticize me for Facebook and Instagram, blah, blah, blah. And actually, I don't. Pallavi does it more. But the fact is that she says, listen, I'm in touch with my friends. I send pictures and I share messages. We all know where we are. We are connected. And to believe that hyper-connected is a bad thing, she says, listen, I'd rather be hyper-connected than be not connected. So there is the other side of the argument that we need to answer. But Bobby, I'm coming down to you here. One of the things I hear from a lot of companies, and we got a lovely audience here, so please keep following the discussion. We'd love you to get in by the end of this chat. A lot of companies say, you know what, everybody can't be Apple. Chodo yaar, creativity unka problem hai. I move at my own pace, we'll figure it out, we will sort it out. And so there is this thing about the fact that Apple is the big benchmark. And everybody can't be an Apple, let's be honest. Although I come closest to resembling Steve Jobs. I hope you know that. A lot of people call me on Twitter as the Steve Jobs of Ghatkopar. Don't ask me why Ghatkopar. But to answer your question, to raise this point, Bobby, we can't be like Apple. Can that be an excuse for not being agile enough? Is that a problem?
No. Sanjay, I don't think that typically is a problem. It's all to do with our own mindset and the way we look at things. At Forbes, we typically have always believed organization, you can nurture agility if you reward success, you tolerate failure and punish non-trial. Reward success, tolerate failure and punish non-trial. The moment you start doing this in the right perspective, you have an organization system which becomes quite agile itself. And I'll just take 1 minute of an experience of mine, because when I joined Forbes, I've been with Forbes for this is my 29th year. I joined as a management trainee from campus. And longevity has got its own pros and cons. We can discuss at the dinner. But when I joined, it was all about what do the employees need to be given to work. Desk, table, maybe a workstation in the 90s. We moved on to what is it that we need to do from an HR perspective to make them work harder. And we brought in all the Six Sigma, productivity tools, etc., etc. Gradually, when that was almost like phasing out, we moved on to asking questions about how do we engage them better. So engagement, we started answering the question of what do I get, what do I give, and do I belong? That's, to me, engagement is all about. And 2 years back, we every year take a batch of management trainees and graduate trainee engineers. Last year, August, I was sitting in my canteen one day. I was late to lunch. And ours is a manufacturing, hardcore, 85-year-old organization with union and everything. And I was having lunch, I was late, and there was a bunch of graduate freshers who had just joined 2 months back having lunch. And one of the guy was complaining about a senior colleague of mine, his boss's boss, telling that fly is so inflexible and this and that, he doesn't allow any kind of innovative ideas, I don't know what to do with him, etc. So one of them, they couldn't see me because I was facing that side, one of them said, you do one thing, to a काम कर. So if there was silence, then this guy was asking, what? दो photo खींच के OLX में डाल दे. Take 2 photographs of his and put it in OLX. His manager is up for sale. That was a shocker to me. Immediately in the next managers meet, I raised this particular point and explained this particular story. Here is a generation. I too have one millennial at home who asked me that, Mama, who arranged my room? I can't find a thing. His room looks like a war zone. Yeah, but that's the new generation. They are able to, sometimes I've seen my son when he was doing his engineering, currently he's in US, the guy one day I was counting his breathing, he's talking to his friends, and one side listening to some music, and he's doing some project, and I said, Kevin, you're doing 7 things at the same time. What's your problem? I'm focusing on all of it. They like chaos, and they would like to get some kind of order for themselves within that chaotic situation, and that's what organizations we need to provide. Then the agile culture and everything will come on its own. That's what I feel.
Yep, I think all of you will probably vibe with what he's mentioning. Absolutely. And which brings me, Pallavi, to the point. I mean, I did a little bit of homework on agility, and a lot of it says that you need a structure, you need processes, and you need people for agility to work. But I'm going to go back to the Ford versus Ferrari example and ask you that question. Because you represent a group, a family group, that actually had the car that I waited for 8 years for on the waiting list, ended up buying an ambassador finally. And that was the Premier Padmini in the Fiat group. And you saw the group actually gradually fade out in business. What do you attribute that to? This is your personal experience. You've been part of the family group. There are some Premier Padmanis still on the road, but that now is a nostalgic drive. What do you attribute that to? Inability to look at foreign competition, changing regulations, and what have you?
I think that particular example has many reasons, but could be agility, because one of the unpredictabilities, if you can look at, is not just technology but a regulatory change. Yeah. So when a regulatory change happens, and it's suddenly from a very closed economy or becomes an open market, which is what happened with the advent of Maruti, I think a lot of things changed. And maybe they couldn't be competitive enough, and they couldn't change their culture early enough. Apart from the fact that what we were talking earlier is that 50% of family-owned businesses actually don't survive their 3rd generation. So there could have been multiple factors, but definitely agility and becoming competitive could have been one of them. Because I think what's most important today is this is today a big topic, and it wasn't so much then in the 80s, because we have technology, and we have technology that's responding to businesses. So it's useless to have businesses who can't respond to technology. It's got to be a virtuous cycle, and therefore technology is throwing up data today. And you can gather that data. And the tools and processes that you mentioned is about ensuring you get quality data, and that you get reliable data, and then you also know how to analyze that data to get insights. So that's one part of the story.
Sure.
I
buy that. But the point you mentioned is very interesting. And for those who are probably aware, regulatory point that you made is so pertinent, because a Facebook's future could change. A Google's future could change if antitrust issues do come up in America, where companies have been broken down. We'll come to that a little later. I have a question for you, and this is a tough one. I'm giving you a heads up on that. You represent a group that has completely disrupted the telecom sector of this country. And you know what we are talking about, yeah? Jio. And today we have a situation where one of your competitors, I don't know whether you have competitors now, one of your competitors is written off a 50,000 crore business to zero. The other one, I don't know, is also bleeding at another level. And there are 1,000 million mobile users in the country. So, Seema, can you be accused of over-agility? If there is such a term.
Yeah, so one can talk to Premier Padmani's competitors as well, right? And ask, but changing the tack a little bit, right? I think from an agility standpoint.
But I want you to answer this question now.
It's a business environment, and that's all I'm going to say on that topic, right? It's a business environment, you do or die, right? And as I said, it's a question of doing what it takes.
Let the fittest survive, kind of.
Yeah, let the fittest survive, right? And that's Darwin. I mean, we are here because of that, right? At the end of the day, as a human race, and if we don't correct ourselves, then it's a question of what next, right? I mean, even for us. But coming back, it's also important to realize that, very often agility can only survive when there is psychological safety in organizations. Most often, right, the person who's closest to the customer, the person who's closest to the problem, right, and your field on street for the most part, right, will actually know not just the problem but will also have the solution, right, or at least will have some ideas around, the solution is already seen. So for example, you mentioned, right, you waited for 8 years, right, I mean that frustrated salesperson, just think about him, right, I mean you can take the deposit but you can't actually deliver the car, and you can't actually, make the money into the bank, right. And so your fleet on street will actually know not just the problems, they'll also know the solutions. But are you providing the psychological safety? How much is the barrier between your fleet and street to the top of your organization, which is where, largely the decisions around strategy and, vision and mission and, all the rest, right, is taking place. So how quickly can you create, break down those barriers? At the same time, right, I mean, obviously there's a big, connect back to creativity. But creativity is relatively easier, right? I mean, there are many, many ways in which one can have creative solutions coming out. Does it take the courage to undo what has already been done? Right? And to say we want to change things, we want to make those, we've been a very successful business for the last 20 years and we worked in a certain regime. But, at every level of your middle management, which is where we talk about the frozen middle, right? Are we taking those right decisions? Are we being courageous? And once again, it comes back to psychological safety, right? To make those decisions and to make that happen. Of course, executional excellence is another piece. But, a lot of organizations have lived in that era of executional excellence. But it's also important to not just do things right, but also find the right things to do, right? And which is where sometimes you have to be able to break past those barriers, right, that I just mentioned.
Fair enough. I get the point. I mean, yeah, Pallavi, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I said that's a very valid point, is that today ideas and creativity is coming from everywhere in the organization and even from your customers.
Yeah.
And, there are examples, companies like Lego actually on their website have got their users and their customers actually putting up new ideas for building new designs and products. And the moment they get 10,000 likes is when they decide whether to pursue it or not.
Oh.
So they're actually crowdsourcing from the market the ideas for new innovation. And so that's giving them agility, and they're listening to the data and they're actually acting upon it.
Oh, interesting point. I mean, and since you mentioned Lego, Toys R Us is closed now. But, I'm going to come to you, Bobby, before I come to you, Noah. There's a point that you mentioned, since you represent manufacturing, the big thing in Pune, and I remember I lived in Pune for many years, big plants, Sandvik, Vulcan Laval, all huge stuff. But, there is an assumption very often made that, that agility and stability, they are not opposites, they actually rhyme, and for a purpose. And why is that so? What does the stability mean? Because it doesn't mean that you disrupt the whole show.
Yeah.
But to be agile, first you need to be stable. And that stability is the foundation, otherwise you can't be agile.
That's right. So in this, my take on this, Sanjay, is that, anyone can be agile if the person passes through positive experiences. Yeah. It will naturally, because, take our own organizations, what are the positive experiences we are providing to the members, our own members in the organization? Even an email, what the person reads, a poster, what the person reads, or a conversation, what he has, a cup of tea which is being offered. Everywhere, in case if we are able to provide with positive, experiences, that will lead into the, there is the peak experience and the low experience and the valley experience. Peak experiences, when it is more, that leads into higher levels of learning. Researchers have proven that. And it's all about, when you're providing peak experiences, that also sets in the basic mindset that, yes, I'm being cared for and I'm being looked after. And that psychological safety which comes in, when you tie in it with a strong sense of purpose to the individual, he will not leave you and go. At the same time, when you don't provide the purpose of that individual's existence in the organization, and when you don't define why that purpose is important to him and to the organization, the general tendency is to look for some other areas where there is much better scope for that particular clarity. And in exit analysis, you keep finding this particular part in the graph hire the same, better prospect. It is not better prospects. It is looking for basically a better alignment and where I provide a better purpose. So are we as HR professionals, it's reaching into a stage, I think most of us are HR professionals, reaching a stage, every traditional HR process is being questioned by millennials. Their own question with regard to positive experiences is highly demanding. And when they don't get it, they will look for the same thing elsewhere, as it happens with their girlfriends and boyfriends. There's practically no different, because even to the organization, for them, it's another relationship. And they break or make it depending upon what is available. So I think the critical aspect in this, Sanjay, is the stability naturally comes when you start believing and explaining and exposing them to the purpose of being there. A person who is, somebody who is just assembling a spray bottle in which you hold soap solutions, if you tell the person that spray assembly is so critical, because even an aircraft pilot, when he cleans the glass, for the front glass of the aircraft, or a mother looking through the window, for his child's safety is able to see clearly when she uses that spray bottle to clean the glass. That is where you give the connect. The more and more and the more of the connect we are able to give, the more and the more and the more people will be aligned. That's what I've got to say.
I mean, clearly what you're emphasizing here is the importance of people in the whole alignment game.
Exactly.
It's not just technology.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned, girlfriend and boyfriend, who expected the Shiv Sena and the Congress to be boyfriend-girlfriend?
Yeah.
But, as I said, in every field, there is some degree of alignment happening. What you don't expect is beginning to happen.
That's right.
And therefore, I think that fluidity is the reality. Noah, coming to you here. Again, Carnegie has... I think taken a degree of research here to talk about Google's, Project Oxygen in its report. And where, again, Google comes up because it has been probably inventing a lot more of its benchmarks for how its performance managers behave and succeed. How relevant is that today, you believe, when we are sitting with an audience here? How relevant are these for maybe companies to look at when they look at agility? How do you look at that Project Oxygen?
Well, one of the key elements is that when we talk about agility, a lot of us would think of it related to technology. So we would look at it, it's more of a high-tech industry, it is more related to IT. When we bring it back, and I think Google's even choice of the word oxygen, agility is really the oxygen for all of us to continue growing and to survive. And when we talk about agility here, just going back to what I had mentioned earlier regarding the ecosystem, it is whether it is providing the stability and the environment for people, whether it is providing the leadership that is needed. And one of the key things is that it has to be part of our daily work or of our being. Because when we talk about agility, it's becoming almost like engagement. Okay, we need to have an initiative on agility. Like at a point in time, everybody was saying the engagement initiative. And I love the term, the statement from Zig Ziglar, who was a motivational speaker, who said, engagement or motivation, it's like showering. You need to do it every day or else we stink. And so it's the same thing with agility. It is a lot more about how do I integrate it in our mindset, that it's every single thing that we do. So for example, when we talk about CRMs, or like Salesforce, or any technological tool that allows us to have data, many of the organizations have the data, but what are we doing with it? That then takes us to the agility. It's the desire to go and to seek the analysis of the data, and what am I going to do with the analysis, and how am I going to be transferring it to the market, and how am I going to be building the agility of my team and myself and my company. And that becomes a very different mindset, which until today, and that's what the research that we had that we just concluded is telling us, is that agility, many of the organizations are saying is critical, and most of the organizations are saying we're getting to it. So it is still as a vision that people will be working on it. And what's very interesting is that in India, the percentage of people who said that agility is going to be the determining factor in the job market in the coming few years is over double what we have seen in other markets. So that says a few things. One, maybe people in India are a lot more aware of what is coming sooner. So we are seeing, that the light at the end of the tunnel could be a train, and so let's do something about it. And it could be as well that here technology is already, it is part of the game, right? So the changes and agility is becoming a lot more important to talk about it, because we know that our livelihood depends on it. Not because our industry will be impacted,
Right.
but because us as individuals as well will be impacted, and therefore our industries and our companies and so on and so forth. So what I really appreciate about what Google is bringing up is that, yes, it is the oxygen to what we need to be doing. It is part of the DNA of the organizations. It's part of the leadership of the organizations to instill it as a mindset.
Okay. But as you rightly mentioned, I remember doing my MBA here, and we were told many years ago, you got to be adaptive. So, sometimes I always worry, and I'm not trying to be a cynic, all politicians are, but I'm basically saying that sometimes I wonder whether we get caught in a world of fads. I'm just putting it out as a devil's advocate. But, I want to ask this question of you, Seema. There's a point that she made, about obsolescence. A classic example, once again, because you come from a big Reliance, and once upon a time, India wanted to be self-reliance. Now we are just Reliance. The point I'm going to make is that this is critical here. You look at Kodak. Kodak was once the Kodak moment was the ad on which a lot of us grew in. What a Kodak moment. And then Kodak goes bankrupt. Very interestingly, by a coincidence, when you look at history, Facebook bought Instagram around the same time, just a couple of months here and there. I think a little earlier, some couple of months before that. And today, Instagram is the big story. I don't even follow my leaders on Twitter anymore. I do it on Instagram. That's a reality. So question for you. Are big companies today probably not able to inculcate that startup culture to some extent? Because you're just big, you're large. You need Mukesh Bhai to approve everything. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think maybe yes and no. It depends on the organization, right? And how conscious are you, right, of long-term sustainability? So I think there are n number of examples of very large organizations that have continued to go from strength to strength. And once again, if you take a look at the Fortune 500 list over the last 50 years, right, I think I'll prove my point. There are organizations that have gone from large to larger and largest, right? And there are organizations that have gone from, well, larger, smaller, medium, frankly, doesn't matter, to obsolescence, right? Completely just wiped off, the face of the earth, right? In that sense. And there are so many examples of those, right? If one just looks at the Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 1000, right? Those points will be proven.
Sure.
So I don't think it's about size. I think it comes back to, do you absolutely have a laser sharp focus on not just the short-term results of today, right, and the stock market of this quarter, or other, right, KPIs of this quarter, and very often, right, organizations can get caught up in the trap of, or the next round of funding, right, if you're a smaller startup, for example. So, what is the next immediate horizon goal for me? So you can get caught in that trap. But at the same time, right, and that should be something that maybe at the mid to senior levels, yes, you take care of that. But at the absolute top of the organization, right, and which is where, once again, the connect back with your fleet on street, right, becomes extremely important. Are you looking at what's the horizon, right? Are you looking at the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And I want to give two examples, one from my current organization, one from my previous organization, right? So let me start with my current organization, which is something called Mission Kurukshetra, right? Which we have. In fact, it's spearheaded by one of our board members, which is Mr. Dr. Mashelkar, right, who actually spearheads Mission Kurukshetra, named also very strategically, right, for basically what it stands for. I guess I don't need to explain the term to you, right, but basically this is where our 3 lakh plus employee workforce, right, and plus our extended ecosystem is able to provide ideas, right, and submit ideas from a business standpoint, which then eventually get filtered, and then obviously a lot of them, once they get past the filtering, right, then get converted into reality. It could be in some cases patent filing. In other cases, it could be the next $1 billion opportunity, right, for the group. So that's one case in point. The other case in point I wanted to make was around, one of my previous organizations, right. This was at Intel, and we had the concept of a T-slurp and a slurp. Right, interestingly enough, T-slurp largely stood for technology strategic long-range planning as an annual exercise, and then there was SLURP, which was basically strategic long-range planning as an annual exercise, right? And T-slurp would actually take place a couple of weeks before slurp, and T-slurp was largely represented by the fellows and basically, the technical ladder, right, of the organization, which basically talked about, right, in the world of microprocessor design and chip design and so on, right, what's happening 20 years out, what's happening 30 years out, what are some of the industry standards, what is happening in the VUCA world out there, which may, completely disrupt the organization, and what from a technology standpoint need to be taken into account by the business. On the other hand, SLURP talked about all from a business perspective, right? What could be some of the disruptors, and where should Intel be investing maybe the next $5 billion on, next fab, which you might see the first piece of chip, right? Maybe 5 years later. But then by the time you need to know whether that chip is still required in the market, right? So you need to obviously take a look at all of those different dimensions. But these are processes that large organizations can set up, right? To ensure that, for the long haul, so you not just have your short-term horizon in mind and your next quarterly results in mind, but you're also thinking 5 years hence, 10 years hence. And especially as a community of HR and learning professionals, right, it's very important that we understand, there's a top, and, what is their role, and are they focused on the right roles, or are they getting very much into operational issues, which are here now and maybe tomorrow or even day after tomorrow, versus are we equipping our leaders, right, to think through, all of those different elements. And once again, the listening, right, I think we talked about it, the listening, the psychological safety, etc., and the courage, right. It's sometimes a little bit of case of brutal honesty, which is where the data, I think, that you're talking about, right? It's a case of being brutally honest with the data. At the same time, the positive element, right, or softer element of, safety, right, for people to be courageous and to be able to speak up and tell the truth like it is, right?
Okay, no, I get it. So you're basically saying that large organizations are not necessarily lethargic or slow, but they can be adaptive.
It depends on the organization and the organization.
Yeah, obviously. But I'm saying that globalization, technology, disruptors, you are capable of handling that. So fair enough. But there is a contra example, Pallavi, that I want you to come in on. The big example is Jet Airways. Closed down, Kingfisher. They made some critical decisions that were failures. Kingfisher buying a budget airline, not probably looking at the financials too well. Jet Airways, really at a time when possibly it should have been looking good, is now folded up. How critical do you think? Because, these were companies that were largely, decisions were taken by one or two key people. Where do you see the role of leadership in this agility story? Do you feel that leaders who are by nature conservative cannot make agile organizations? Or do you feel leaders themselves have to walk the talk? Otherwise, companies become like the leaders are.
Well, like everything else, leaders have the most critical role to play whenever any initiative or any culture has to be set in an organization. So leaders necessarily need to do something right. What is that right is the crucial question. And much has been spoken about psychological safety here right now. But when leaders are doing a lot of the listening, and not just listening, but they have to observe, it's about ratifying somebody's idea with something else, right? Something that's more factual, something that's more validated, something that's more tested. But risk-taking is something that they have to do. I read one of the research reports which says that the role of leadership is going to change over the next 3 to 4 years. Earlier, leadership was all about giving strategy and, that kind of stuff, leading from the front.
Yeah.
Today, everybody is talking about leaders have to be doing, right? Because every day you have to change. You're talking about agility is nothing but quick change management, right? Earlier, change management was a big phenomenon. You had the whole organization had to go through its whole exercise. Today, you're talking about how to make it nimble and make it continuous And for that, many things have to fall in place for leaders. To begin with, I think if we have to speak, and because we are soft skills people, and I have less to say on technology, is how do you give organization or employees that direction on what they need to do in the wake of change, okay? Why should that change happen is the first thing. Even if you do all the analysis and take all the right decisions, you have to get people to act on that change, right? And different people respond to change differently. So communicating, and therefore the social intelligence part is a very important part. If somebody is going to embrace the change, somebody is going to be a fence-sitter, somebody is going to reject it, somebody is going to be downright. So I think what leaders need to do first and foremost is to create psychological safety and to get the willingness of people, create a sense of trust, right? So trust and positive relationships is one of the first things they have to start building inside their organizations. That's the first thing they have to do. Transparency. You know, I think our research has actually shown that, and this is how Indian respondents responded, that 88% of the respondents actually said, when they were asked, how would you respond to, or would you be willing to get appraised by an AI-driven process instead of a human? And they said, no problem. 88% said no problem. But when they were told that you will not know the criteria, that number dropped to 58%, right? So they need to know how. So once technology, artificial intelligence, or all this stuff about what's going to happen to my job, it's not just about purpose, it's about losing confidence.
Can I just supplement something?
Yeah. Oh, why did you come in?
Since you mentioned about the Jet Airways experience and psychological safety, when Jet Airways decided to close down, we did something where the Pune office, because we had a corporate tie-up, and the Pune guys were losing their jobs. It was very clear. We called all of them because we thought it's a good opportunity because they were not getting their salaries, and we needed our entire organization to be retrained on corporate etiquette. So we took special permission from Jet Airways management, and they were training our people in batches for which we were paying them. The Jet Airways staff, we were paying them on an honorarium basis for training our people, and about 25 to 30 different batches of our entire Kasarwadi, the Pimpri and the Kasarwadi plant members got trained. It was more like a backup for them because they were earning something where they were not getting salaries, and till the time they all got placement in other organizations, which I also put in some references, we actually helped them. Why I was mentioning this was, they were training our people. The goodwill that created about the psychological safety that this organization provides to one of their own vendors or clients, I think it indirectly also gives a very positive messaging with regard to what I can provide to my own members within the organization. I think it makes a hell of... So what you typically demonstrate does help with regard to creating this psychological safety factor, rather than just saying that, that we are there. But even when you do it with your either customers or vendors, it makes a huge difference.
Something I want to add to that. So, this once again goes back to, right, you mentioned job displacements and job safety and so on and so forth, right? And once again, it's a VUCA world out there, and, we are hearing, irrespective of which industry it is, right? We're hearing of, job losses, right? I mean, it could be called layoffs, it could be called redeployment, whatever the conversation is, right? I think as HR practitioners, it's extremely important that we use our influence to make sure that the employees are not getting a raw deal, right? Unfortunately, some of those, news of layoffs or displacements, right, are also coming out with horror stories in some cases, right? I mean, and I'm sure again all of you are reading the news, right, of this junior HR professional, right, who walked in and, decided to walk the employee out, took the badge, took the bag, took whatever, and basically, let the person off the door, right? And just think about, what does that do to not just that person whom you let out the door, but, everybody else, right? The balance 99 that are actually watching and saying, how are you treating your employees, right? And so, if you're not partnering with me when times are tough, what are you expecting from me, right? In terms of, then is it just an emotional contract? Is it a psychological contract? Is it just a work contract? I mean, what kind of contracting is one doing?
Yes.
And so it's extremely important that we as HR professionals, right, go out of our way to ensure that we influence our organizations to do these things right? Especially when the times are not right. Then the question is, how are you treating your employees or something?
Yeah.
Not just your employees are watching or other employees are watching, your customers are watching, and in today's day of media, right, be it print media, be it social media, news just spreads absolutely rapidly, right? And the kind of damage you can do to your reputation is absolutely immense, right?
I can make a
that
point.
Organization is dead then. For sure, right?
I remember this one about the CEO of this big industrial group had to personally come and apologize for the HR managers' indiscretions. And let me tell you, I think Glassdoor today is become the place where a lot of, that's your ultimate referendum on what you're doing right or wrong, like it or not. That's a reality. I'll give you one example. In fact, you mentioned leadership, and I was just thinking about it while you were talking, and I think when you came in, you should look at football teams. I mean, how many of you here follow English Premier League or any other league? And you find it's brutal. I mean, it's brutal on coaches. When you win, you're great. You lose one season, you're out. It's pretty brutal. But, on leadership, let me tell you, there are coaches. Tottenham has just got a new coach who was sacked earlier by Manchester United. And Tottenham has won 3 matches in a row.
Yes.
And they're saying that he is able to make his team players perform better. Exactly the point that both of you were making. I want, ladies and gentlemen, you to get your questions ready. I'm coming to the last question here from the panel, and then we'll get going. Question for you, Bobby. A question often asked of companies which are agile. When is the last time that you did something for the first time? Yesterday. And would you like to make a public disclosure of what that was?
Yes, we basically went about creating a kind of a feel with regard to, we have this small HR interventions which we have, and in the new plant in Jharkhand, which is little far away from Pune, there is some kind of mental makeup telling that it is better to be in the city, the 2 premises, rather than in Jharkhand, etc. So all of us decided to go on a trek, and there is a hill nearby, Taljai Hill, and we took the whole team there. And the basic essence of doing that was we ensured the families of the members also joined, and when they came back, it was more of a celebration which was done there, and which was something which we used to do in other premises, whereas in our own factory we rarely do that. And that has changed the entire perception, because the objective behind getting the family there was in the evening when you reach home after a 1.5 hour of traveling, okay, the general impatience which the spouses or the children display relatively would have vanished, and that was the essence of bringing them as well. And since it was early in the morning, they also realized that it is not that easy to reach back. So I got that feedback from my team, some of the team members today morning. Small little things, nothing is spent, it's not expensive, small these kind of experiences. And my take on this is, the moment you consider an organization as a sheer instrument of profit, you tend to operate from an acting upon paradigm rather than an acting with paradigm. When you think of the organization as a purposive community, then you deliver and act with paradigm which will make huge impact to each and every member directly or indirectly associated with our organization. Because I keep hearing about people saying that, we need to change the mindset of people. For me, changing the setup can be done on a CNC machine, not of people. So I think we go wrong there, because we are looking at organization as an instrument of profit and not as a purposive community. The moment you start considering it as a purposive community, our own connect with people increases, help them with the purpose, clarity on purpose, clarity on the opportunities, clarity on their success, clarity on their wellness, and clarity on their leadership. And leadership is something which we need to keep in mind. When you are young, you need to prove yourself. And when you become a leader, you need to ensure the team members become successful, and that is the success mantra which we need to keep encouraging to our line managers in organizations. That's it.
And just to go back on this as well, because you're absolutely right. We don't change. I mean, it's not a setup, but the environment gets people to change. So as adults, we will change if the environment changes. And so having as well the opportunity of giving people the right environment and changing the environment according to what needs to be changed for at the end of the day, most of us here we're profit-making organizations. So the bottom line is what we talk about and the revenue is what we talk about. But it's the people who actually bring it. So I absolutely agree that it's not a switch on and off, but then it's our role to then say, okay, so what is missing in our environment?
No, to me, it's all about, I think we should have that basic belief that if you take care of our people, they will take care of the business.
Yeah.
And the moment we take care of people, they are bound to take care of the business. And here, where we drift is that we keep jumping between the profitability aspect and the people aspect. Sometimes the priority is given to the profit, and sometimes the priority is given to the business, which creates in the long term a lot of confusion about the culture of the organization and its value systems. And people start questioning what the hell is happening. One day you are saying we are doing good and people priorities are given much importance. Suddenly you find a drift there, you start worrying about people. What is the first thing which gets typically cut when you go through a bad time? People's budget, training budget, etc. In our organization, we are extremely clear. This is the slowdown period, and I've been told let the marketing guys travel the maximum possible, because bad times, if we are with the customers, they will remember. HR, I know this year I will end up with a very high spending on my learning and development, because people are little free because of the low pressure, so they have time to learn. So I spend a lot in training so that they are able to go ahead and be ready for the next upswing which is going to come. So I think we have to be, but convincing the top management about all of this is our role. And if we align with what they are saying, then we can put a tag telling that strategic partner to business, but we are not doing what we are expected to be doing as professionals. So mind that, please keep that in mind. This environment, Noah, my take on it is, any environment you operate, an environment you want, you need a strategy S1. As Sanjay said, many of the organizations failed. Environment keep changing. When it moves to E2, you need a strategy S2. But many of us think that I have been successful in S1 strategy, so I'll continue in S1, and you don't realize the ground getting lost underneath, And then suddenly you wake up, the game is gone. The game is gone. That's what typically happens. So you have to be aligned with the environment.
Bobby, thanks very much for that, and thank you very much. The truth is, and I think all companies, whether you are publicly listed or you're not, even if you're a private limited company, the fact is the quarterly pressure of earnings does create a massive problem for most companies to invest for the long term, be agile, take the risks that you want to. Not everybody is cash surplus, so the quarterly pressure on earnings, I'm sure you face it as well, and with Reliance, of course, but that's a big one. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready with your questions? Do we have some questions? Because while your hands go up, I want a 30-second answer to this question. Please, I'm waiting for your questions right away, but this one, till you come up with yours, I want a quick answer. There is this famous saying that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If it's not a problem, don't fix it. But that also assumes that it will break, and you'll fix it only after it breaks, which means you're not actually doing what I would call as the preemptive checks. Do you go, which model do you go for? If it ain't broke, don't fix it? Or would you like to kind of break it and get it ready even before it gets damaged?
I mean, the Reliance motto is growth is life, right? So if it ain't broke, yes, of course, one gets into preventive maintenance and checking in. But then you're also saying what's the next toy and what's the next toy and what's the next toy, right? Yeah. That needs to be built. Yeah. So that's my 30-second response. Yeah.
Well, frankly, today technology is giving you predictions for the future. So you can actually anticipate where things will break.
Okay.
That's the part of that's the core of being agile.
Yeah. Okay.
For me, I think what's more dangerous than breaking is changing and not be ready for the change. BlackBerry was not broken. BlackBerry's environment changed. The industry changed. People's needs changed, and they weren't ready. Yeah. So being broken, this is an extreme. The worst in our environment, for me, is the change that we're not ready for.
That's true. And I remember MySpace. I don't know how many of you even have heard of MySpace. And it's crazy, but I remember the Alta Vista days. I mean, they don't exist anymore.
I would be cautious about reaching the breaking stage, and I would always try to see whether we are able to preempt it coming and be prepared for it, and supplementing what you said now.
All right. The panel is pretty much in love with each other, which is great. Let's have questions now from the audience. Who has the first question, as we say it in Dale Carnegie?
There's a lady there.
Yeah, let's hear the question from there. Yeah. Can someone please give her a mic?
Hi. So during this panel, we've discussed how it's important for organizations to be agile. But in this rise of automation that we're now facing, and as you've spoken, data can predict so much for you, the need for human intervention to get business results has decreased a lot. So how, in this ever-changing environment, does one, even at a young age, remain relevant and prevent to become obsolete?
Okay, here a question. Who would like to take this one? There's a lot of talk of artificial intelligence, big data, drones, and very sexy terms out there. What does it mean for human connect? Maybe Noah, you're the one to answer this. You're the one who's a Carnegie walking, talking ambassador.
Yeah, and it's
You're the mushy one here. Tell us.
well, thank you
Not
for
if
the
you
question.
know her. She's very business focused.
So thank you for the question, because in our business world, we need to do things faster, better, and with a better costing or cheaper, right? That can only be done if we have the right data to support us doing it. So actually having the data and befriending the data and seeing that data is there to help us go faster, help us go to the right direction, help us have a more economic business model, will actually help us survive longer and survive our competition, and actually it becomes a tool for survival. But what many of us, and this might be as well a problem with the media, is that we're talking a lot about replacement. Yes, there is replacement, but there is replacement in certain industries, there is replacement in certain areas, but most of the other areas, it's about who's going to be working with that data. It's how to embrace the need for this data.
Okay,
This
can
is what
I
just
just a minute? Can I augment it from the young lady's point of view? There's a lot of talk of how Amazon is basically almost capturing the world right now. But there is also a lot of debate about how that data is actually dumped on its employees, who move around with all kind of sensors on their body, and they literally have. I was reading a report, X number of time to go and answer the call of nature. And probably they stop halfway for all I know, because they have to take something off from the shelf. So there is an element where this utilization of data is in a great number of ways causing a lot of human stress as well. So
Definitely, but let me take, for example, the example of DHL. DHL, what they have done is that they've used the data to see how can we meet clients' needs. Now everybody wants things faster. We can't wait for a week to get a letter by post, right? So everybody, it's Twitter, it is WhatsApp, it's instant messaging. So waiting for even just DHL to get us our package in a day or two, that was too long. So they went and they researched and they used data and they used technology to have the drones, and so that the drones minimize the time to receive the package by a certain percentage. So at the end of the day, I could have said, yes, and data and everything in DHL, it's going to minimize the number of people working there. Or I can say, well, I'm going to get more business. So I will need as well the people to run that. So it's, again, I will have to go back to the mindset. It's an environment, and how do I utilize that data in my favor?
Okay. Other questions? Pallavi, you make your point. Other questions, I will come to you.
Yeah, so for me, the answer is very simple, is that you've got to recognize that there is going to be constant change. and that what you knew yesterday is going to be replaced by a machine possibly. So the only antidote to that risk is to be continuously learning, right? And do what machines can't do. So machines can't feel. So that's why emotional intelligence and soft skills and social intelligence, that's really what human beings bring to the table, apart from creativity, problem solving and all of that. But problem solving will be taken over by machines, right? But empathy, understanding another person, persuading other people to act on the change you want them to, that's what human beings can do.
Okay, all right. I just want to let you know that I just saw a picture of robots becoming dentists, so God help you when that happens. Yeah, ma'am, your question.
Hi, I like to ask this question generally for the organization which are old, maybe 70, 80 years old organization who have came to the stage basis on using manpower, their intelligence, their services to people, and now we are seeing that we are going towards more and more automation, digitization, and generally a lot of time the management has to see the tug of war between people and the focus on digitization. How they deal with those sensitive issues sometimes, or how they take care of those challenges.
So the conflict between mechanization and the impact on the employees who possibly their work changes or they get displaced as well. Would you like to take that? Sir?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a shot at it, right? And once again, there are organizations that have very successfully traversed this, right? I mean, think about IBM. Think about, once again, you're talking about older organizations that have been in industry for, in some cases 100 plus years, right? And they've survived everything. I mean, think about our parents, right? They survived the black and white TVs and the new gadgets, whatever, right? Mixies and so on that came in the kitchen to, all the rest, right? I mean, over several decades, right? And the same goes with these organizations, right? Now, what they would have done, right, is, I think you mentioned it earlier, right, which is to provide the learning and development opportunities to continue to build new skills, right? So, yes, it's a displacement for that one individual involved, but can one see the value in that one individual in terms of saying, okay, off you go, it's a layoff, versus saying, hey, I'm going to reinvest in you. I think you made an excellent point, right, around when it's downtime, that's the time then you want to increase your learning and development budget. That's when you want to make it obvious to your people that, these are the skills of the future. I mean, are you constantly talking about the world of work, right? Are you constantly looking at what are the future skills? Am I as a business doing that, but am I also doing that for my employees, right? And enabling my employees to continue to keep, moving forward, right? Now, I may not be able to do it to the last mile. I may not be able to do it to the last person, but, for the majority, right? Am I able to make that happen, right? Also, you're better, actually, if you think about it in another way, right? You're actually putting a greater value on the human, right? I mean, think about factories 200 years ago, right? I mean, when the first industrial revolution and, those kinds of things started, you largely, you're putting a cog in place, you're doing this, you're doing that. And think about, the world of manufacturing today, right? The human who's there, he or she is far more evolved, right? I mean, the kind of work that they're doing there is far more complex today. I mean, it reminds me of Coke, it reminds me of Reliance once again. And the factory automations, right, that have gone there in the last several decades is humongous, right? So what the human is doing there is far more evolved, far more complex, and it's these organizations that have enabled that human to evolve, right, over the last several decades. And it's the same person, mind you, right, that has learned all of those skills. So the question is then, what are we as HR professionals doing? And are we pushing the boundaries for ourselves, and are we pushing those boundaries for our organizations, right?
Okay, all right. We'll just take another, how many more questions do we have? If you can raise your hands, we'll take a few and then we'll
just have
one there.
Sanjay,
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have a question. I have a comment more on the discussion that's actually going on. I represent the finance and HR of an AI company. And for all of you who are just suddenly looking at me like this, these are problems that are more psychological, in my opinion, than anything else, primarily because when we also go back and actually build stuff, right? The classic example that I think all of us need to go back and take a look at is the fact that earlier there were no ATMs. So people thought that bank tellers would be out of their jobs. I don't think anybody went out, right? But today, none of us can function without an ATM. So over a period of time, there are two things to do. One is to adapt towards technology, and two is definitely to invest in people so they also get adaptive towards the technology. Now, technology is bound to go back and make changes in our lives. But it's up to us as a group of people whether we want technology to replace us or we want to adopt technology and move ahead with it. And I think the latter obviously makes sense, and that's what's currently happening across the world in many organizations. So it's not going to replace jobs, it's not going to do this unless and until we stop investing in our people.
Okay, valid point, very valid point. I'm sure most of you will agree with that. Noah, you wanted to say something very quickly?
I just want to take 10 seconds. if you
Yeah,
don't mind
okay,
on
I'm
that,
monitoring
right?
you, 10 seconds, yes.
Yeah, so we've just launched, in fact, reverse mentoring for our senior leaders. And this is for, when I say senior leaders, are truly, truly senior leaders on 3 topics, right? And this, we're trying to say it's strictly reverse mentoring. You're not there to talk, you're there to listen, right? You're there to ask the questions with our young millennial population, right? Around digital culture and capability, technology, right? Understanding that whole world, right? The next one is around millennial management, right, itself, and the third is around modern leadership practices, right? And so we literally launched it. Interestingly enough, a lot of our leaders actually want to take us up on the option, right? So it's not as bad as one imagines.
We have,
Okay, all right.
we have been doing it for the last 3 years, and these reverse mentors, we, after 2 years of reverse mentoring some of the senior guys, we make them buddies for the new guys who are coming in. It works very well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you know, I have been given a warning by the lady on the right that, you know, I should, she reminds me of that man who comes at 9 o'clock on a TV show and says the nation wants to know. But I need to make one very quick point. You know, when you look at adaptability and agility, and I've been a big fan of hockey in my growing years. You remember the time when India and Pakistan used to literally win the Olympics and all the world championships? And where are we in hockey today? You know what happened? They just changed the conditions from grass to astroturf. And the teams could not adapt. And now it's Australia and the European countries, Canada, Britain, everyone who beats India and Pakistan. And we are no longer in the space anymore. We are sometimes lucky to even qualify to play in Olympics. Can't ignore that. I'll give you one other example because we live here in Mumbai. You know, the famous khans that we have grown up in, arms outstretched, tum paas aaye, you muskuraye. And you look at the khans today are being challenged by a new breed of actors. One of them here looks like Ayushmann Khurrana actually. And you know, and he's reinventing cinema. He's reinventing cinema with a very different kind of films. And people are loving this, you know, boy next door kind of an actor. You know, in the times that I grew up, an actor was supposed to be like, you know, he had to be the hunky, the Punjabi kind of a stud. Now you love actors who are like a man next door, Nawazuddin Siddiqui. You see, the game is changing. Even the khans will have to reinvent. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, in any scope of the world we live in, there is no choice actually. Perhaps we have been agile. It's not that we have not been agile, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So we have been agile, but we need to get a lot more aware of what can happen if we are not agile. So possibly that's one awareness that will help all of us in the room. I've had a wonderful panel here, both on my left and right, which has made my job pretty easy. And you as an audience have been fascinating. I'm sure you'll have more questions, and maybe over dinner, over cocktail, whatever there is, more of an interface. Please give them a big hand, and thank you very much for doing it.